You're listening to the 4-Phase Cycle Podcast with your hosts, Dr. Alex and Megan of ZESTY Ginger. If you're looking to naturally balance hormones and learn how to work with your body instead of against it, you've definitely come to the right place. As a duo of an integrative MD and a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner and best friends, we use the 4 phases of the female cycle in combination with functional lab work and mindset practices to transform the lives of the women we work with.
We also have a whole lot of fun along the way. If you're new around here, it's best to start with season 1 before jumping around and plan to roll up your sleeves. Showing up for ourselves and enjoying our lives is what good health is all about. Just a quick reminder though, this information is not intended to diagnose, manage, or treat disease. Always consult with your doctor before making changes.
Hi, everyone. Hello. Welcome to another podcast episode. This is Alex here with you, and we are going to be talking about what the stress response is for and also what it's not for. And this is a really important topic all the time. But as you can imagine, after about a year and a half that we've all had, this is starting to be much more prominent in our experience, and people are starting to realize the effects of living in the stress response. Now, some of us have been at it a while, and some of us are just coming to that realization. The cool thing is about the stress response is that once you understand it more, and then also understand where other tools can be filled out in your toolkit, then it becomes a lot more manageable, right? And that's where Megan and I's entire framework that we follow of educating, because it leads to empowerment, which leads to greater enjoyment of our lives, no matter what we pick and choose to do in our lives and what's important to us. That is our whole shtick, right? And so bringing an understanding to the stress response experience and what it's there for, in my opinion, is very helpful to then knowing how to navigate it and use it appropriately. So the stress response is generally thought of as a survival mechanism, and that is absolutely true. There's more to it, though, than that. Because if you just think of it as something that, you pull the trigger on when there's a life-threatening event, and then other things, take over after you are safe, then we're essentially kind of looking at it. The analogy that came to my mind was the Find My Phone function, right? Like, you have a thing, something happens, and you use the find my phone, and then you find your phone, and you don't need it anymore, right? Now, when you look at it from a really big view, I could see how that would be the argument, and there's some truth to that. What I would like to highlight in this podcast episode is the idea of the stress response actually being the body's mechanism for restoring balance and harmony inside the body. So it's not just getting us away from the bear, and then we're like, oh, we're away from the bear. All right, go back to normal. The stress response actually continues to see that all the way through until the resolution of not only the problem, but restoring harmony. That is really what it is designed for. And with that point of view, we can really start to see that in some healing states. If we get really down on ourselves of like, oh no, I have this stress response, sometimes we actually are beating ourselves up. Now, for the stress response, is it very soothing, in our opinion, to do things like parasympathetic tools, right? That's why in Health Transformation Accelerator, the first week, we are teaching our ladies that, they have physical body built-in mechanisms and reflexes that they can get into that rest and digest, heal and learn state, right? And it still matters to have the awareness of, why is my body doing this in the first place, right? It's not I'm doing these parasympathetic tools because there's something wrong with me. That is very different than I'm using these because I'm honoring what my body is doing, and I will support it as it does that. Right? And that gives meaning and structure to the things that we experience. For example, Megan had a lot of fight or flight trigger from mold. I had a lot of fight or flight triggered from childhood trauma and chronic pain, which is essentially a constant state of being ramped up. Therefore, we totally understand that when you're in it, you're like, how do I make this stop? And that is why that we teach the tools. That's a really important part of it. But without the understanding, we've done a lot of beating up of ourselves, and that is counterproductive, because essentially beating yourself up can continue to perpetuate the stress response. So if you've had health issues, trauma, accidents, things like that, it doesn't have to be big T trauma. I think people downplay repetitive little t trauma over their lifetime and say, like, oh no, I've never had a big event like that, but the little ones can also add up and do the same thing in the central nervous system. So that's kind of one arm, and that's really what it's designed for. And I think having that understanding gives us more of a navigability. I do not believe that's a real word. I think I just made that up. Allows us to navigate those kind of situations better. Now, to build on that even more is the fact that once we get used to the stress response, people start to actually create the stress response for themselves based off what they have going on in their life. And this can show up looking like a bunch of different things, like what people actually do, but the result is essentially the same, right? So what people end up doing is that rather than bringing balance and harmony to the body through the stress response, allowing an event to happen, and then that recovery is supported by that process, and then moving forward, that we can sometimes get into a loop where we induce a stress response as a way of motivating ourselves or using it as a strategy that has worked for us. So this is very, very common in high functioning, high achieving people, right? Whether you work in a hospital or you're an executive or you run your own business, that level of urgency oftentimes is the trigger to the brain to go, oh, it's urgent. I better hustle and get that done. Who is listening and raising their hand? Because there's so many of us that do that, right? It's like, I could do the laundry today. Nope, I can do the laundry today. Nope, I can do the laundry today. And oh my gosh, tomorrow I'm packing for a trip because I have to leave the next day. Now I do 8 loads of laundry. I mean, and that is just one tiny little thing. Or I'm going to turn in that paperwork. I'm going to write that brief. I'm going to do the thing. And oh, now it's due the next night. Let me get jacked up on the stress response. Sometimes we're like, that's where the coffee, right? And you get that little, it's called eustress, that momentum that's like, I gotta do this and get it done, and I will power through it. And then we get done, and we're like, okay, right? And then we go through this cycle again and again. In that scenario, the body is still reaching and restoring balance and harmony in between when we allow it to. So the goal of the body and that mechanism, what it's doing, doesn't change. However, as you can imagine, if we are constantly doing that, like every morning or multiple times a day, or just consistently in general, we train the brain to stay there. It becomes efficient at doing that, and it does begin to eat away at the body's reserves and its capabilities to keep restoring that harmony, because in some cases it's because there's not enough time, and sometimes on top of that there's depletion, lowered reserves over time. And there's so many blog posts and articles and podcast episodes about how stress, leads to things like inflammation and disease states down the road. I don't think I need to go into it here, but essentially it really does become a misuse of a system that we are often asking to work because we're like, well, I want my health to be better. I want to lose weight. I want to resolve that acne. I'm tired of being tired, right? I have pain. I hate the migraines and I hate the cramps. I hate the heavy bleeding. I hate the infertility. Yes, and we cannot ask a system that we are misusing and misrepresenting in its role to then also work for us in the capacity as it was designed to do, right? So this is a little bit of an uncomfortable pill to swallow, because oftentimes we have been using that strategy for a really long time, right? It starts in high school, or sometimes earlier, sometimes college, or we get out and we get a certain job. There's some jobs that kind of have that built in, right? So when I worked in a trauma center as an anesthesiologist in the south side of Chicago, you can betcha I had the stress response kicking in fairly consistently. And even though it wasn't me choosing to do that, I did absolutely want to modulate it, because I understood in that moment I wanted it to work in my favor and have it be functioning for that healing, restoring balance and harmony component long term, rather than trading it off for then. Because of that, 4 strategies for motivation, right? There's this concept of moving away from pain motivation, and that's that strategy, right? You feel the stress, you know the time crunch is coming, the clock's ticking, or whatever urgent metric that you measure, time, boss level, fill in the blank. When we are using that, we are moving away from the pain of the consequences of whatever that thing is, right? We'll run out of time. The boss will be mad. Your partner will say XYZ. All of that stuff is moving away. Moving towards something is a different motivation strategy, and many of us have not really explored motivation towards. So the brain, yes, it absolutely will move away from pain. However, what often happens, and this is where people get into the cycle, is the brain will go, oh, there's urgency, let's mount that response, we get it done. And then there's this backlash of, we want to relax, we feel burnout or stress, and we're like, now we'll take some time. And then all of a sudden, oh no, I'm behind on XYZ, let me catch up, and you go through the cycle again. It's not a foolproof strategy because of that, because if you are always coming back down and the motivation is then decreased afterwards, right? You accomplish it, the motivation falters, then we're stuck in the loop. And what do? We add guilt and shame on top of that. Then our central nervous system is responding to that. And then again, this is an opportunity where we're like, why can't I heal? Why will that stubborn belly fat not go away? Why can I not have a regular period? All of those things then come up and are competing and actually making things worse, right? And then we're like, I'd be motivated to the urgency, but now I don't even feel good. Now I'm worried about that. Moving towards then becomes, what carrots does your brain care about that can be motivational strategies? Now, in my opinion, this is such a varied answer to that question in terms of what motivates each of us. And for each area of our life, we likely have a different motivation carrot that applies, right? In relationships, you hit a relationship motivation, it may not be, what do I want to get a massage or something, right? Sometimes the rewards are what we really get jazzed up about and excited and want to move towards, and training our brain to focus on where we're going so that it's a consistent up motivation, rather than I get jacked up to do the thing and then I have the rebound and all of the other murky stuff that I just described. Right? So that is from a conceptual level, and I'll do more episodes on this. But as we begin to shift away from how do I get away from pain and moving more into what do I actually want in an ideal world, and part of that process, we have lots and lots of podcast episodes about this, is the belief of, do I think it's possible? Do I think it's worth it, right? This is what comes up for people. And then they kind of tend to cut and run and go towards the moving away from pain motivation strategy again. My invitation to you is to consider, if that strategy is exhausting and you don't feel great and all of that, how would it feel to put in the work to unpackage some of those beliefs for the lifelong trade-off of consistently moving towards your goals and doing it in a way that is not negatively impacting your health and your experience of life by interrupting a process and using a process the way it was not designed in the body to do. The last part of this that I'll cover is just the reminder of, even for those instances, the countercurrent of getting into parasympathetic state, which is the rest and digest, heal and learn state, through the physical body and the things that we have in our disposal there, still apply. Right? Because sometimes we're in a loop. The strategy has worked for us in a lot of ways. Here's the thing, don't forget, if you have a strategy that you use and you're like, my goodness, I don't even know why I do that, the answer is always that at some point it worked for you and got you a certain result. It could have been back when you were a kid, or it could have been in a different scenario, but it helps a lot of times with the judgment of ourselves when we know that the only reason the brain kept it around and remembered it and created it as a neural network that results in a strategy of you doing something because it worked for you at some point. Therefore, the way that I look at it is it can stay in our toolbox. If there's something ever urgent that needs to happen and you get a little stress response from that, like that, yeah, cool that we have that, but any given Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, do we need to be using that? Probably not, and it doesn't match with the rest of our goals. It's not that we can't, it's just that if we want to be healthy and energetic and have a good libido and reach our dreams and visions for the world and who we are and our kids and all of that, then we have to ask, what else can I intersperse, right? And so as we make the transition and we acknowledge that we've been using a strategy for a long period of time, this is what's hardwired into the brain, and now we are going to systematically move towards wiring and rewiring the brain for other strategies and making them habitual. The getting into rest and digest state, we have noticed, really helps people move in that direction with less bumps. That's not to say that something will happen and you'll get kicked back to your old pattern for a second. That's cool. The difference is that when you have a toolkit of things to interrupt and readdress whatever's happening, then the kickback of falling off the wagon tends to be much smaller, easier to, I guess, weather would be the word, because it's all about our experience. And so moving through life with a positive, supported, optimized experience means that we're not expecting the world to be perfect or for our every single thing that we want to be happening exactly the way that we want, although, that's what I would like. But in the grand scheme of things, when we can navigate it, that's really the empowerment of I can handle anything, whether I think, I'm keeping up with my new strategies, or right now, maybe in my perception and interpretation, maybe that one I missed the mark a little bit. What do I do now? And that's where parasympathetic tools super duper helpful in our opinion. So what are some parasympathetic tools? Things like laying with your legs up the wall. We talk about this one a lot, but it's very powerful in that it's a reflex, because as you lift your legs up, you have blood that is stored in your legs. It enters your bloodstream. You get more filling of your heart with blood, and the heart rate will drop. That is what it is designed to do. That is why in the hospital, if someone's dehydrated and their heart rate's high, you give fluids, their heart rate goes down, right? I mean, there's a million other ways that can go. That's just a quick example, but that's the kind of thing that is built in. So I like having things like that, because there's a lot of times where we are so caught up in whatever's happening that we're like, I'm not going to put on music and sing and hum along and move my body, which I'll talk about next. It feels too far for me. Like, when you're so grumpy that you just want to stay grumpy. And so, because I have absolutely been there myself, this is where I think it's important to have tools where you don't necessarily even expect yourself to go there, because sometimes we're not going to be available for that. And I think it is damaging to put people in a position where they're like, oh, well, I have tools, but I can't actually do them, so now I feel bad about them. And Megan and I are definitely just not about that in any way. So laying with your legs up the wall can help us chill out. Doing the chest thump, so taking the flat palm of your hand and thumping on your chest. For me, so the spot that will resonate with you on the chest is going to be a little bit variable. Most people is around the same spot, but just kind of feel around until you notice it kicking in. But as you lightly thump on your chest, it's about maybe two finger breadths below your clavicle bones, in the middle of your chest, above where your breasts are. That is where, in doing that motion and thumping in that location, can help activate the vagus nerve to also kind of hit the chill out button as far as the parasympathetic nervous system. Other things that also do that are things like the humming and the singing, right? And the one that I like that is not that, the humming and the singing you have to be available for, I think, right? However, the gargling, like just gargling some water and then spitting it out a couple times, can be one of those where you're like, I'm not doing anything that is like too happy, to things like that, right? So any one of the, there's multiple options there, and there's things from there that you can use in the car, if you're walking someplace, if you're having to sit quietly. One of the other ones that I like when I sit quietly is drawing really big figure eights with my eyes. And these are all tools to pull out. It doesn't really matter why you're in fight or flight. That will work because of the activation of the parasympathetic nervous system. So that kind of applies across the board for this episode. Alrighty, so it was a pleasure hanging with you. I hope that you found this helpful. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so screenshot this and tag me on Instagram so that I can see what you are all doing with this and how you're using it in your own lives. All right, lots of love. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for coming out to hang with us on the podcast. It is our goal to transform the way women are treated in healthcare And we need your help. We need your help to get the word out. We have a lofty goal of 1 million downloads. And we know that as this podcast grows, we're going to be able to reach more women, get more amazing speakers for you, and bring the most cutting-edge information.
If you found these podcasts helpful, please take a moment to text 5 women you know the link to the series. We appreciate your help so much. Can't wait to see you next time.